know that it's been a long day for some of you. The first thing I want to say is that I am not going to talk for 50 minutes. In fact, I'm going to try to give a fairly short talk, and then we can have some interaction. I'm Dede. I am in the Harvard Graduate School of Education. My first experience was with immersive learning was in 1977 when I played a game called Zork that was purely text-based. And the fact that all that I could do was type N, S, W, E, or O for open. That was the total interface for interacting with Zork. And yet people were very immersed by it and engaged by it. Gave me a clue about the power of the medium. My work with virtual reality started in 1991. My work with augmented reality started in 2003. I've tried to be on sort of the cutting edge of what's going on. The second thing I want to say is that if you look at my title slide, both to the left and to the right of my webcam image, you will see at the bottom a URL. When you have a chance, type that URL into whatever device you're using, this web browser, because there's a point at which I'm going to ask you to watch a video. That's a YouTube video, because I'm not going to try to stream video within this. So just when you have a chance, just take that small URL and queue it up in a web browser. So this is about polymorphic digital puppeteering. And I'm going to begin with the challenge. The challenge is that the key barrier to widespread usage of many types of XR is the terrible human interface that we're stuck with right now. We've developed very rich and interesting contexts that people can be inside that are engaging for them. We've developed imaginative activities that they can do, but the forms of human expression are completely inadequate and inauthentic. So if you think about full face-to-face, unmediated interaction, there's multiple dimensions of verbal, which you are getting through my microphone, beyond semantics. There's tone, pitch, what's called prosody, volume, and all of those dimensions are sending different kinds of signals that modify whatever the semantics are of what I'm actually saying. Then if you think about the multiple dimensions of nonverbal interaction, there's gestures, there's stance, interpersonal distance, facial expressions, and all of those are also part of the social signals we send when we're communicating. And a lot of what we spend our time doing when we're with other people is noting what they're doing on all those dimensions, verbal and nonverbal, interpreting that in real time, and then emoting when we communicate back to them. And we've developed that so strongly that it's now largely unconscious for us. But it's certainly a very, very important part of human interaction. Now, to try to do that emoting with keystrokes and mouse movements just doesn't work. And for that matter, they're trying to emote to us with keystrokes and mouse movements. Really just doesn't work. Now you say, well, look at the movies, look at Gollum, you know, look at the raccoon in Guardians of the Galaxy. Why don't we just have bodysuits with tracking? Well, first, it's very expensive. And second, who wants to put on a bodysuit with tracking every time you just want to have a social interaction? So I'm convinced that as many advances as we make in different forms of XR, until we crack the human interface problem, we're not going to get the kind of widespread usage that we want. So having said that as a general thing, now let me describe a specific example that shows progress that we're making in this issue of human interface. And the grounded example I'm going to use is learning to negotiate. So I have done some work over the decades with people at Harvard who teach negotiation in the business school and the law school, the Kennedy School of Public Policy. Negotiation is actually taught pretty widely across universities. And that's because it's kind of a sweet spot for a lot of 21st century skills. If you're a good negotiator, you've got good empathy because you're trying to understand the person you're negotiating with. You're good at collaborating because that's what you're trying to do, to turn an adversarial relationship into a collaborative relationship. You're good at critical thinking in real time because you've got to be watching what the other person is doing and trying to figure out how you're going to respond. And ultimately, you're good at conflict resolution because at some point in the negotiation, to really try to maximize your gain, you're going to come up against what they want and you're going to have to resolve the conflict. So negotiation is a very sophisticated form of social interaction in which all of these dimensions of verbal and nonverbal that I was describing are important. Now, I don't teach negotiation, but I have talked to a lot of experts in teaching negotiation, and it's quite difficult. People enter with different levels of skills. If you've got 50 people taking a class in how to negotiate, they have different kinds of biological factors. Some people may be a little bit on the spectrum in terms of autism or Asperger's, which is going to make it more difficult for them. They have different levels of prior experience. People who have a lot of experience in social interactions are going to have an advantage compared to people who don't. But beyond that, everybody has weaknesses. Some people's weakness is saying no. Some people's weakness is that they don't deal well with microaggressions. Many of us have implicit biases that we may not be aware of. And teaching you to be a good negotiator involves surfacing all those things and then letting you practice to build up skills in handling that. In other words, it's not just intellectual. Think of negotiation as like playing pool. You can understand perfectly Newton's 3 laws, but that doesn't mean that you can put the pool ball in the pool pocket, even though you have a total intellectual understanding of what you need to do. What you need is practice. And even the most skilled person at negotiation who gets practice on their weaknesses can get better and better. Some of it involves unlearning. I'm not going to go into that today, but that was the topic of my keynote in iLRN2018. And if you do a search on the web, you can track down that keynote if you want to watch it. And some of it is a matter of identity. That when you're negotiating, you step away from your normal identity and try to do this empathetic, collaborative, critical thinking, conflict resolution identity, at least temporarily. So what people who teach negotiation would like is a kind of a simulator, an interpersonal skills simulator, which of course could be used for other things besides negotiation. It could be used, for example, if you want to improve your ability to date and build relationships with people that you're attracted to that you don't know. There's many, many areas of interpersonal skills that a simulator would be helpful for. But what's complicated about an interpersonal simulator is that it's not like a flight simulator. A flight simulator is terrific, but it's all physical. And so a machine can run a flight simulator. But because of authenticity, the simulators that attempt to portray human interactions with some kind of AI or some kind of machine learning or some other kind of purely computational solution don't work. They're profoundly inauthentic. And beyond the fact that they seem very wooden and weird, then you don't get transferred into the real world because the inauthenticity stands in the way. Put another way, some kind of expertise is situation invariant, and some kinds of expertise is situation variant. So for example, if your expertise is to play Rachmaninoff's piano concerto better than anybody else in the world, that's situation invariant. If you want to spend 10,000 hours being really good at that, you're going to spend 10,000 hours playing the piano, and it doesn't matter very much where. But if you want to learn to be a really expert negotiator, that's very much situation adaptive. And it's going to, you're going to have to learn how to negotiate with men and with women, with people from different cultural backgrounds, people of different races, people who speak your language and don't speak your language, people who are children. I can tell you as a parent, there's a lot of negotiation involved with children, and so on. So if you're going to evoke all of your weaknesses, you need a system that's polymorphic. So think about Mystique, the mutant in X-Men. Mystique could become anybody. That's what we need in this simulator. It's like the Wizard of Oz in the sense that there's somebody behind the curtain that's controlling the wizard and makes the wizard seem very real and very human. But unlike the Wizard of Oz, there's many possible shapes simulator has to be able to take on to cover the full range that you need in order to handle your weaknesses. And people who teach negotiation really struggle with this because having students sort of negotiate with each other is inauthentic. They don't know how to play the other role. They don't look like the person that you imagine yourself negotiating with. Actors can't change their appearance dramatically, not in the moment. So practice has been a big problem in teaching negotiation. And you also have to know how to play the role. So scripting is very crucial. And the first thing an actor would say is, well, what kind of boss do you want me to be if you're going to negotiate with your boss? And you have to have a script that you want to give them that's going to work. So I'm portraying, if I can sort of recapitulate where we've been so far, I've talked about a big challenge, which is a bad human interface. And I've talked about an example of the kind of interface that you would need to teach complex interpersonal skills, which is certainly not an interface that simply involves a keyboard and mouse. So now I want to talk about what's known as digital puppeteering. And as an example of digital puppeteering, I'm going to use a system called Mursion. Mursion is a company, full disclosure. I'm an advisor to Mursion, but I'm not trying to market Mursion here. I'm simply using Immersion as an example of any type of system that involves digital puppeteering. So I'm going to come off of that slide for a minute and put up a different slide. And I can't see what's up. So let's hope that in a minute, other slide is going to appear. Try this again. There we are. So this is a slide of the back end of Mursion or any digital puppeteering system. And what you see on the left in the room with the two consoles is a simulation specialist. That's the person that's behind the curtain. That's the puppeteer. And the simulation specialist has a lot of complicated equipment right now that they work with. They're wearing something that gives the head position. They've got a game controller that they're using to do all the nonverbal signals of different kinds. They've got voice morphing technology so that they can change the voice of the character that they're portraying. And they can switch among up to 5 different avatars at the same time. Now, avatar is the technical name for human being playing a digital character, as opposed to agent, which is a machine playing a digital character. So the simulation specialist is controlling up to 5 avatars who present themselves very differently. Their voice is different, their gestures are different, all the nonverbal signals are different. The person at the other console, who actually wouldn't be in the same room, they could be anywhere in the world, but they're not able to see the simulation specialist, is the person who's experiencing interacting with digital people. And something happens that's similar to what happens in games, which is suspension of disbelief. So part of you knows that you're just sitting in a chair and you're looking at a monitor and you're seeing a bunch of 2-dimensional pixels on the monitor. But with really good games, you suspend your disbelief and you're drawn into the situation. And that happens to a surprising degree with digital puppeteering, even more strongly than games. There really is the illusion that you're interacting with people. So I'm going to go back now to the first slide, and I'm going to ask you to take the URL at the bottom, put it into a web browser, and watch a 3.5-minute video. Now let me tell you what the video is about so you know what you're looking at. This is a short segment of a student in a negotiation class at Harvard practicing an assignment that the negotiation faculty member has given to him. And the assignment is that you're employed by a business that's in trouble. Its revenues are shrinking, it's losing money, it's having to lay people off. Sounds like the pandemic, right? But you want a raise. So this is a very tough negotiation situation to see how many of these skills you've really been able to master. And you're seeing just a short piece of the negotiation itself. And my point is not to try to teach you something about negotiation by watching just a very short piece. My point is to show you what it might look like to be that student, to be interacting with Mursion, this digital puppeteering system. And you'll see a part of the negotiation with the two bosses. And then at the end, you'll see just a short segment of a part of the debriefing, which you get from another avatar. And all of those people are played by the same simulation specialist using a script that the professor who's teaching the course wrote. So with that background, follow the link, watch the 3.5-minute video. And when you're done, I don't know what function key it would be, but raise your hand or something so I know when I should start up again. market. And so because they can make so much more money building games that are much simpler from a design point of view, entertainment games, that why would they bother with this fringe market? So we live on hand-me-downs like Unity and like the different authoring shells that we have that come out of the entertainment industry that we never could have funded from the beginning, but that work for us once we've got them. So what if you make this system bidirectional? Once you've got the technical advance, each person can wear the mask of a puppet and can focus only on the verbals, and the nonverbals follow. That would really be interesting from a gaming perspective. So pick your favorite game, let's say The Witcher. You, as the Witcher, are going through the game. You get to a point where you have to negotiate with the sorceress, and you pull out your puppeteering console and you interact with somebody else, maybe a friend of yours, maybe somebody you don't know who just happens to be in the same place at the game at the same time playing the other role, or maybe it's crowdsourced and there are people who just make a little extra money from people wanting them to play a certain person in a game at a certain time, and they're specialists in it and they're really good at it. So you see yourself as the Witcher negotiating or doing whatever the interpersonal interaction is, and you're interacting with this digital puppet that fits what's in the game. Next generation games could be built around that. Right now, we don't build games around that. We build them around rich context and we build them around intriguing activities because the human interface is so terrible. But when the human interface becomes manageable, then games can really make a quantum jump, for better or for worse, in terms of their level of engagement, because now you've got this whole interpersonal social dimension within the game, not just outside of the game in playing on a team with an audio channel or in, you know, the forums or whatever. So now we can go back to education and find that those consoles are cheap, because if they're widely used in education, we've got the hand-me-down that we need to get past this barrier of inauthenticity for learning interpersonal skills. So that's the forecast that I want to make. It's an optimistic forecast. Technically, we're within 2 to 3 years of being able to do this. Economically, I can't believe there aren't people in the entertainment industry already working on it. They're not talking about it because it's going to be a huge proprietary advantage to be first in being able to bring something like this to market. But it's going to really change what goes on with XR. So I'm excited about it. I hope I've made you a little bit excited about it. And if you want to learn more about Mursion and learning, Mursion as a company every Tuesday at 1 to 2 p.m. East Coast time has a webinar that they do showing different kinds of uses of their system for digital puppeteering in education. So whether or not you like Mursion, if you want to learn more about digital puppeteering and learning, that webinar series is a place to start. So with that, I'm going to stop talking. I have used a little longer than I wanted, 35 minutes, and we've got about 15 minutes left. I'm not quite sure how to handle questions within this interface, but I'm open to being asked questions. somehow and to trying to have a discussion with you.
Can you hear me, Chris? This is Heather.
I do.
All right. I think what I'd like to try, and by the way, everybody knows you can post your questions in the Verbella chat pod, and we actually are keeping an eye on the YouTube. Well, but I think, yeah, that was it for me. That was F4 clapping for Chris. Yay! Let's get some F4s because we will go to questions in a minute. F4s. Thank you. Very good. All right, Chris, there actually was a comment in the chat that I'll read what the comment says. It says, as VR becomes more mainstream, abilities of it, we can finally leave the idea of using avatars that are comfortably human. When you are, say, a flying toaster, then you really get away from pre-con. That wasn't a question, it was just a comment. Do you have anything to say?
Yes, I think that identity play is an important part of gaming, but it's also an important part of growing up. And the ability to engage in different kinds of identity play is enhanced when you've got an interface that really lets you assume an identity different than your own in a very authentic way.
Yeah. All right, and there's still a few more questions. Don't mind, I'm not going to say who you are because I don't know if you want your name read as I read off some of your comments here, but someone asked a question saying, isn't Facebook trying to make avatars even more human by scanning people?
Certainly you can work to make avatars even more human, but I think that the virtual world is best used to be different than the real world. If you're going to chase the real world, why bother? We've got the real world. If you want to really interact with somebody else and have them look very much like themselves, use Zoom. It's going to be a lot better than anything that we can do in terms of graphics for the foreseeable future. So what's really interesting, I think, is magic, the ability to do different kinds of magic. Now, what might magic be in interpersonal interactions? I would urge you to read Jeremy Bailenson book, Experience on Demand. It's the best book, really, about imagining what VR can do and be. Jeremy Bailenson's in the communications department at Stanford. That book is inexpensive. It is just chock full of ideas. And some of the ideas depend on something called TSI. TSI stands for Transformed Social Interaction. So, for example, in the real world, if you're giving a lecture to a large group of people in the audience, good lecturers will scan the crowd, but you will find the lecturer is looking directly at you only a small part of the time. And if you're sitting in the back, they're a long way away. With transformed social interaction in a virtual environment, the lecturer is always looking at each person in the audience all the time, right? That's magic. And every person in the audience is seated directly in front of the lecturer in the front row all the time. That's magic. That's transformed social interaction. And the minute that we get away from the physical limits of the real world and we get into digital magic, then the full power of for learning of XR becomes much more apparent.
Another question, Chris. This question is, oops, and it just scrolled out of my view. What sort of skills and experience does it take to write the Puppeteers?
The script is something that depends on the objectives of the learning. So, for example, in a negotiation class, and remember that I don't teach negotiations, so I'm parroting what I've learned from experts who do teach negotiation. Perhaps you want to teach how to handle a microaggression. So you walk in, you think you're going to have a pretty friendly negotiation, and suddenly the other person, the avatar, is in your face and going back on what you had negotiated the last time you got together. How do you handle that? And emotionally, it can be very difficult to handle that unless you've practiced it and you've learned how to suppress your natural emotions at the time about the microaggression and just stay with your intellectual game plan and use some strategies that build empathy and that build collaboration. So the script for that particular kind of negotiation for the SIM specialist would be get in the face of the other person initially. If they do X and Y, then back off. And if they do X, Y, and Z, by the end of the negotiation, you can be back to being collaborative. But if they do A and B, then be even more aggressive or even get up from the table and break off the negotiation. Well, then you have your debrief and your coach says, wait a minute, you know, I understand that you got mad when this happened, but what you have to do is learn not to get mad, get even by winning the negotiation. Now go back in and try it again. So the script is reinforcing the behaviors that you want the person to learn and undercutting the behaviors that are their weakness in negotiation. And you can imagine similar kinds of scripts that might be created for almost any interpersonal skill that you're attempting to master.
Okay. The next question, it may be a little bit out of place in our conversations because it appeared a little bit higher up in the room's chat pod, but it says, what about the uncanny valley argument? The avatars might behave realistically, but realistic.
You know, for those of you who don't know what the uncanny valley is, it's basically something in which the simulation is good enough that you're being drawn in and you feel as if it's real, but it's just a little bit off. And so it frightens your subconscious. Your conscious mind is buying into it and your subconscious mind is saying, wait a minute, this is a little bit more like a zombie than it is like a real person or whatever the uncanny valley would be. And certainly there are limits to how much a person can be simulated by a digital puppet, even with a lot of AI and so on. So, for example, if I wanted to teach somebody how to negotiate in the Mideast, maybe I do the basics in a digital puppeteering system, but at some point, I would have human beings face to face doing the really sophisticated part of the training to get past the kind of uncanny valley issues. So I'm not trying to portray that this is some kind of a magic thing that totally handles people's learning how to do good human interactions, but it certainly is a step beyond what we've got right now with people role playing for one another without a script, without training, and with no mystique like polymorphism to help you identify your implicit biases and your weaknesses.
Another question that's come in the chat, it says, puppets are often used. How do you see this changing that kind of therapy?
Can you repeat the question? You broke up a little bit.
Here we go. Puppets are often used
In therapy. Okay, yep. I got the question. I think the important thing is not whether or not it's a puppet. If you go back to dreams are fundamental, and that's why what I remarked on in my welcoming remarks this morning in the opening was that people have a deep need for some level of working out the real world in virtual form, whether that form is dreaming, gaming, digital puppeteering, the holodeck, whatever it happens to be. We have this deep human need to handle the real world in part by going through some kind of simulation, and a dream is a simulation that represents parts of the virtual world, parts of the real world, and helps us to learn how to handle that. So the puppets are just a way station, but I think that they're a way station that really opens up XR, because what's holding back XR right now is the terrible human interface, in my opinion. And breaking that human interface barrier is not going to leave us with the holodeck, but it is going to leave us with something that could be big in the entertainment industry, could scale into learning, and then could let us teach some of the interpersonal dimensions that we now struggle to communicate more effectively.
All right, these are great topics because a few more questions are still coming in. Chris, are you good to go? We'll keep doing a few more.
I'm good for another 5 minutes, and then I think I'm going to let everybody who hasn't had dinner have dinner, and everybody who has had dinner have a dessert. And
yeah, that sounds like a good plan. All right, so if I reduce it down, sorry everybody that's left it, but I'm going to I'm just going to go to this one because it is actually next. Do fidelity and realism of the avatar is relevant to establishing presence?
Yes, so the first thing to say about fidelity is that fidelity is a black hole. You can spend enormous amounts of money trying to chase fidelity and not get there and actually not improve learning very much. There's a rich research literature on fidelity and learning, and the fidelity tends not to matter because people are good. Once they suspend their disbelief, people are good at taking things that aren't very faithful, and in their imagination, they fill in what's lacking. So the only time that high fidelity is really important if it relates directly to what you're trying to learn. So for example, if you're trying to learn to read X-rays, the X-rays that you're learning to read have got to be just as real X-rays are, because otherwise you're mislearning and you're going to end up getting into trouble. But for the purposes of learning basic things and in human interactions, the only thing I can say about digital puppeteering systems like Mursion is that there's a strong element of surprise 2 minutes into the interaction about how real it is, even though you know that you're sitting in front of a monitor interacting with digital avatars. Our minds are just wired to kind of take over and make situations like that seem real. So the fidelity does not have to be very high in order to get the kind of impact that you're looking for, either for education or for learning.
Excellent. Oh, and like following crowd that's been watching this here tonight, I don't see any questions from them, but they definitely pass along cheers for your presentation, Chris. And I think everyone here in the audience would pass along claps too. So F4 is clapping, everybody, or you certainly clap on too.
Well, thank you for staying. I hope this wasn't too much talking. I hope it informs the rest of your stay. My colleagues and I do a lot of work with multi-user virtual environments like internet games. In the showcases tomorrow, my colleague, Dr. Sherry Metcalf, and I will be presenting work on a third grade curriculum called EcoMod that involves both virtual ecosystems and a computational modeling environment that's virtual, all for third graders. So if you get a chance during the showcase hours, please come take a look at Ecomod in Frame VR. And with that, I'm going to wish you a good evening and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Yay! So much. Turn back on spatialized voice. Dude, with that, look how quick he was gone. Man, he wasn't kidding. He's like, sure, good night, dessert. He's gone. Well done.
Really like ice cream or something.